to change that
but it's there.
Historically is justified, but they do feel it at a very rapid rate where they feel that their status has been quite suddenly displaced in a variety of ways. So I think for them, a portion of them feel it more greatly. And I guess what I'd add there, I mean, we've sort of gone through a time, and arguably Trump's election is a full stop on it, possibly, we'll see, is where period 2 or 3 decades of identity politics where the currency was all about feeling aggrieved. The way you could be heard, the way you could attract more privileges and rights and airtime was to be aggrieved and proclaim your victim status. So we just heard one of your guests talking about the men's rights movement. Arguably, they took on that currency because they felt that was the way they could be heard. So it was a resentment ideology, is that we are victims too. There was one of aggrieved entitlement.
And speaking of that, I mean, I think you say no collective group or organisation other than perhaps the football leagues is actively representing the white working class. You're saying that that's the only way they can be heard now because people aren't listening to them.
I would think so. I mean, generally the left, certainly the Labor parties, I can't speak for New Zealand, but they've certainly embraced the diversity or identity politics. So it's all about minority groups and let's give them more privileges and more rights. And the undercurrent of a lot of this was that the ordinary working man, often white, etc., was out there being called, you're misogynist, you're privileged, and to some extent we were just hearing a bit of that from one of your guests. And I would say that's the extreme end of the men's rights movement, and defining it by that is, I think, a bit limited.
Well, it's difficult when they're the loudest ones, right? You know?
Well, that's true. That's true. I mean, especially on social media. Always get,
of course. But that's what this whole movie is based on, is this thing. And it's just, it is very difficult for us to hear about how it's so difficult and we're supposed to stop wanting equality because people are complaining about the fact that they're losing their privilege. It doesn't sit well with me.
No, but nevertheless, what we're really talking about is...
In what extent is the ordinary working class man maintaining any sort of privilege? So what privilege does he have in modern society exactly?
He can see himself represented constantly in the media and in the annals of power.
How has he represented himself in the media?
Just by seeing men on screen constantly, way more than women.
He does not identify with the middle-class educated man that would traditionally be on screen. Like, this is where, classing all men in the so-called elite privilege sense is completely inaccurate.
It's not classing them as an elite privilege sense. It's just things like, there was one guy in that movie saying, if a woman decides to have an abortion and I don't want her to, I have no rights. No, you don't. You don't have any rights over my uterus.
No, but you're going back to the red pill again. Whereas I'm trying to, I understand what you're saying, but I'm trying to say that whatever you think of it, this is actually a movement or a sense of dispossession, Tanveer, having quite a large effect on the politics of the Western world at the moment.
Well, if you look at people being elected, etc., it is true.
It's a broader comment on the left. So rather than, in terms of how economics has affected people, it has disproportionately affected the ordinary white working class man. And a lot of ethnic groups would also fall into that category where they're semi-skilled or relatively unskilled. And I'm sure you get a lot of that, say, in Maori groups, etc., in New Zealand.
Tanveer, I'm sorry.
Our
apologies. I've got to go because I hear the music, and thank you for joining us today. Chris Weekhider, always a pleasure having you on, Chris.
Interesting conversation that. I think I'll run away now.
Interesting conversation indeed. And Penny Ashton.
No worries. Sorry,
Thanks, everybody.
Shouty, but I feel very strongly about this.
Back tomorrow.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight on Checkpoint, Pike River families have met with Solid Energy CEO in an attempt to persuade the company to not permanently seal the mine. 8 people lost on the Kaipara Bar, but at least that many more people had been booked to go out on the fishing trip and didn't. The football world mourns a Cinderella Brazilian team lost on a flight to a playoff match in Colombia. As the road begins to allow traffic in and out, will tourists come back to Kaikoura? We look at whether summer bookings are being cancelled. And Southland wants you, 10,000 of you. So how are they going to get you? It's a busy Checkpoint tonight, and we will be back with you after the pips and the news.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. A high risk of rockfalls and landslides has seen this afternoon's convoy out of Kaikoura cancelled. 43 vehicles travelled north into Kaikoura this morning and about 50 vehicles were registered to leave the town this afternoon. Chris Bramwell reports from Kaikoura.
The Transport Agency Regional Performance Manager Pete Connors says wet weather has significantly increased the risk of rockfalls and landslides on the already fragile route, making it unsafe for travel. Mr Connors says while people will be disappointed, the risk was just too high to allow vehicles through this afternoon. He says people registered to travel over the next fortnight should be aware that there may be cancellations at times due to safety on the route. People who were registered on today's southbound convoy for light vehicles should register for the next one, which leaves on Friday at 2 p.m. The road will be opened for 2 convoys tomorrow, but for heavy vehicles only. Kei Kaikoura, ko Chris Bramwell aho.
Centreport may move some quake-affected buildings off the Wellington waterfront. Its Chief Executive, Derek Nind, says it's working with the Wellington City Council and others on options for port buildings, from potential repair through to removal. Mr Nind says some earthquake-prone buildings were already marked for removal before the earthquake, including 2 warehouses on Aotea Quay. Another, the vacant Shed 35 cargo store on King's Wharf, was damaged in this month's quake. The proposal does not cover the damaged Statistics House, which the port is still awaiting the final word on, or Customs House or the BNZ building. The Social Development Minister is standing by the way the government's dealing with claims of abuse from former children in state care. The ministry is taking a case-by-case approach, but a judge who heard from about 1,000 victims wants an independent inquiry and a formal apology to all those who suffered abuse. Opposition parties say people making claims against the government can't trust a government agency to investigate their case. The minister, Anne Tolley, defended the process in Parliament.
Last year I introduced a fast-track process that gives claimants an option to have their claims resolved faster while still receiving an apology and, if they want, a financial settlement. Around 900 payments have been made to date, totalling more than $17 million.
Anne Tolley says the new Ministry for Vulnerable Children will consider establishing an independent complaints service. Investigators have found the black boxes from a chartered plane which crashed in Colombia, killing members of a Brazilian football team along with officials and journalists. At least 71 people were killed when the plane slammed into a mountain on approach to the city of Medellin. The BBC's Tim Vickery is in Brazil.
It's the biggest tragedy to have affected Brazilian sports. It's also the biggest tragedy to have affected Brazilian media, with 21 journalists losing their lives. As recently as 10 years ago, Chapecoense weren't even part of the top 4 professional divisions in Brazil. But over the last decade, a small town club from the town of Chapecó in the south of Brazil have risen and risen and risen. This is a group of players who collectively have touched professional heaven.
Tim Vickery reporting. The wife of one of the men who died in the Pike River mine explosions says the meeting with Solid Energy today was a total waste of time and the company is trying to pass the buck. Solid Energy Chief Executive Tony King met with several family members of the 29 men who died in the mine in 2010. Anna Osborne, the widow of Milton Osborne, says Mr King said it was not in his power to stop the mine being sealed and that he was under pressure from WorkSafe to get the seal finished.
It's been like this for 6 years now. It's always someone else's problem. It's never their problem. And, you know, we can mention something to them and they'll come up with a name and say, well, that's not my responsibility, that's so-and-so's responsibility. So we're hearing the same rhetoric over and over again, and they're just trying to fob us up and pass the buck.
Anna Osborne says this isn't the end for the families and they'll continue to protest the sealing of the mine. Solid Energy says it has no comment. GeoNet is investigating reports of another hydrothermal eruption in Rotorua. An eruption in Lake Rotorua early on Monday morning caused a geyser of water to shoot metres into the air. GeoNet tweeted this afternoon that it had received reports of another eruption and had dispatched a volcanologist to the scene. It's 4.5 minutes past 5. To sport, and this summer's men's ASB Tennis Classic will feature the strongest field ever assembled in Auckland, according to tournament director Carl Budge. Defending champion Spaniard Robert Bautista Agut, three-time champion David Ferrer, Americans John Isner and Jack Sock are the top 4 seeds at the tournament, while 2009 US Open champion Argentinian Juan Martín del Potro will headline the field. Carl Budge says the depth of players on show in January will be the best in tournament history.
You've got massive servers in the likes of Isner and Vesely. You've got the 2 biggest forehands in tennis in Del Potro and Jack Sock, and then the great defensive and returning players of the likes of Ferrer and Bautista. So, look, I think when you put all of that together, plus all of our defending champions since 2009, it starts to become a pretty compelling field.
ASB Tennis Classic Tournament Director Carl Budge. The New Zealand cricketers flew to Australia today, buoyed by their Test Series win over Pakistan. The 3-game Chapel Hadley one-day series starts in Sydney on Sunday. Bowler Tim Southey says they enjoyed the Test win in Hamilton and it won't take much to adjust to the shorter version of the game.
It's the way cricket is these days. Tours, there's your chop and change format, so yeah, we've got a couple of days to get our heads around what the challenge is ahead. I guess enjoy what's happened, but also look forward to what lays ahead of us.
Tim Southey, and that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, fat activism with Kat Paws. Full of figure and full of life, she will argue that there's more fear than fact behind our aversion to flesh. Well, this week's overseas correspondent, Leanne Huang, is on the line from Vietnam, where authorities declared a day of mourning for the late Fidel Castro, but the locals are importing consumer culture from the United States in the form of Black Friday shopping frenzies. It's all on Nights from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Cloudy periods with isolated showers developing tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, scattered showers developing. Some may be heavy tonight. Waikato to Wellington, including the central high country, cloudy with scattered rain spreading north, becoming fine tomorrow morning. Wairarapa, occasional rain easing to isolated showers tomorrow morning. Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, mainly fine, areas of morning cloud tomorrow in Nelson. Marlborough, cloudy with a few showers, clearing tomorrow morning. Canterbury, mostly cloudy with isolated showers, rain developing tomorrow night. Otago, mostly fine, isolated showers in eastern areas. Southland, cloudy periods and a few showers becoming confined to the coast this evening. And the Chatham Islands, fine spells and a few showers, clearing tomorrow. It's 5:05 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you so much, Katrina. Thank you, Katrina. Busy checkpoint tonight. We begin with the Pike River Mine and the 29 bodies inside it. Representatives of Pike families met with Solid Energy CEO this afternoon in an attempt to persuade the company to not permanently seal the mine, entombing the bodies inside it. The families want access to the drift. That's the beginning of the mine, well before where the coal was, effectively the road in. Because the first explosion occurred as a shift was changing, some people believe there may be bodies in the drift, people on their way out. Former miners and mines rescue personnel from both New Zealand and overseas have stated they would be prepared to go up the drift and they don't believe their lives would be at risk. But it's not happening. And if the proposed seal goes in, it may never happen. A legal appeal against the seal is being mounted. Nigel Hampton QC taking that, and Allied Concrete has decided to not provide the concrete for the seal. But today Solid Energy told the families directly it is proceeding with the seal, full stop. Bernie Monk was among the family members told that by the company's CEO.
Business as usual for them, and we found it pretty frustrating. Our counter offer was, now that the Type C seal was completed and that, WorkSafe are quite happy with that, we gave them 2 options. One is to stop work and get our experts around the Roy's Round Table and nut out a situation where we think that the job can be done. They didn't want any part of that. And so we said then we'll walk away from the whole job and we'll get a team in that can do the job, and they walked away from that. So they really told us that business as usual, and I said, well, we'll meet you up at the mine tomorrow because I can't guarantee that they're going to stop. I can control the families from here on because they're pretty hot under the collar over this.
So, despite the fact that members of the mines rescue team have said they believe it is safe and they are prepared to go in themselves, there is absolutely no way that Solid Energy is going to countenance that or support you in any way.
Well, that's what they said to us today. Yes, that's correct.
And is it true that people have been working up to 170 metres up the drift, Bernie?
That's correct. And there was something that we pointed out today. They've done about 260 hours of work with Mines Rescue to actually put that 170 metre drift in with gear on under that situation, and nothing happened. They did 265 hours. And now that 170 metre area is as safe as a church, and they still won't budge on doing a further investigation about going up that mine.
What is the family reaction to this now? I'm sensing, Bernie, because I've spoken to you many times over the years, that you are reaching new levels of frustration.
Oh, beyond me, I'm so frustrated. And Anna Osborne and Sonia Rockhouse were on the teleconference today, and they said they're going up to the mine. Anna's already stated that she's not going to leave up there till they listen to her, and she's not going to let them seal Milton up in the mine when they are not prepared to sit around the table and just hear what our experts have got to say, because you've got to realise it's been going up over 5 years and they've never even corresponded with our experts. And our experts are saying the same thing they said the first day they arrived here, which was over 5 years ago. This job can be done, and they still are saying that today. So what more can you do? Why are the families upset? Because we're told that it's Solid Energy's way or no way, and that's what's the frustrating part about it. And I think it's gutless what Solid Energy are doing, and I think it's unheard of anywhere else in the world to actually see men underground and leave them there. And I just find that so frustrating that they're doing that.
That's Bernie Monk, one of the family representatives who was at the meeting today. Tony King is the CEO of Solid Energy. Now, we have asked repeatedly to speak to him or to any representative of the company. Today, we managed to get through to his phone.
I'm not in a position to speak with you right now, I'm afraid.
Well, would you be in a position to speak to me at any stage, Tony? Because this is a matter of public interest. You are a branch of the state, as it were. The families are very upset about how the meeting went today, and they feel very let down by Solid Energy, and Solid Energy just consistently refuses to talk. At what stage will you be in a position to talk?
Look, I can't answer that right now. And look, I'm sorry, John, I understand where you're coming from, but I'm on another call at the moment, and I do need to go back to that.
Well, if you were on another call, why did you take this one? I mean, Tony, I really do feel it's time for Solid Energy to front.
Can I take that comment and your suggestion on board, and I'll take that on board, and I'll get back to my other call, John.
Just before you go, where are you at with the sealing of the mine? Is that going ahead?
Look, there is no change to the position that the company has outlined over the last week.
And so why is that, in the context of what Nigel Hampton is doing before the District Court, in the context of what the families are saying, in the context of what Mines Rescue personnel are saying who are actually prepared to go up the drift, why do you feel that the seal is so important and so urgent?
Yeah, John, look, I'm sorry. I have said I've got this other call on the go, and I do need to complete that. Okay?
Don't you feel there's public interest here? Don't you feel that actually someone from Solid Energy needs to answer these questions, Tony?
Look, I understand your position, okay, but I just need to deal with what I'm...
Look, Tony, understanding my position is meaningless. What's important is that you are now in charge of this organisation. There are 29 dead people inside that mine. The families feel terribly let down. There is a matter of public interest here, and no one from Solid Energy will talk.
The directors of the company have released a number of statements over the last week, and they set out our position quite clearly in terms of the factual basis and where the company is at.
How dangerous is that mine, do you believe?
Oh, sorry, John, I'm going to need to leave this call. I apologise.
That was Tony King, the CEO of Solid Energy. It's 5:15. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. The football world has reacted with shock and grief after a charter plane carrying a Brazilian football team crashed in Colombia, killing 75 of the 81 passengers on board. Brazil's president has declared 3 days of mourning after the accident, which killed most of the players in the Chapecoense team, along with support staff and roughly 20 journalists. Among the survivors who suffered serious injuries were 2 players, a member of the team's coaching staff, a sports journalist and a flight attendant. As Bridget Burke reports, the team had been travelling from Bolivia to Colombia to play in a South American Club Cup final tomorrow.
In the daylight, the extent of the tragedy becomes a reality. Bodies shrouded in white sheets litter the crash site, whilst rescuers continue to comb the wreckage of Flight 2933 in a desperate search for survivors. The charter flight, carrying 71 passengers and crew, was carrying the Chapecoense First Division football team, their officials, invited guests and 21 journalists. The plane was flying the team from Bolivia to the finals of a regional tournament in Medellin. Aviation authorities say the plane suffered electrical failure and crashed just after 10 p.m. local time, splitting in 2. 7 survivors were pulled from the wreckage, including one of the team's goalkeepers, who later died from his injuries. As Chapecoense fans gathered at the football club stadium to leave tributes and await news, Brazilian President Michel Temer declared 3 days of mourning.
Eu quero mais uma vez lamentar o infausto acontecimento.
I want to express my sadness for the awful incident which has caused the death of a soccer team and the many people who accompanied the team from Chapeco, which happened early this morning. It is extremely sad. Sadly, all we can do beyond crying for those who have left us was to arrange federal government support for the families who are in mourning.
Spanish soccer giants Real Madrid observed a minute's silence before training as a mark of respect to those who lost their lives. In Medellin, where the search effort had been hampered by bad weather, Mayor Federico Gutierrez said the city was doing all it could to help.
The most important thing is now to be able to save lives, and we're here for that. It is very sad news. All their friends, family and their country have our solidarity.
Multiple investigations into the accident are now underway. For Checkpoint, I'm Bridget Burke.
Veteran South American soccer correspondent Tim Vickery, now with the BBC, describes Chapecoense as the mouse that kept on roaring. I spoke to him, he's in Rio de Janeiro, and we began by talking about the fact that as well as the team and its managers, the plane had almost 24 journalists and commentators on board going with the team to cover the game, some of them people Tim Vickery knew.
That's right, and this is the story of the decimation of a football club. But as well as being the biggest tragedy in Brazil's sporting history, it's the biggest tragedy in the history of the Brazilian press. Obviously, the football team is centred around one city, the small town of Chapecó, which has played witness to this extraordinary fairy tale rise of this small town club from a club who were barely household names in their own home a decade ago, to a club competing for a South American title, the first Brazilian club to do so in 3 years. But the journalists, the death of the journalists gives it more of a national dimension. And the ones that I knew came from my adopted home city in Rio, because the TV channel that broadcasts the games is based in Rio. So that has made the tragedy more national. And people are feeling this all over Brazil, because the story of Chapecoense, the extraordinary rise of Chapecoense, has been such a great story that it's touched the hearts of Brazilians up and down this giant country. But the death of the journalists has taken it to another level, I think.
There's a stunning photo on the BBC's website at the moment of the stadium, and there's just a little boy sitting there taking stock on his own. I guess he's about 10 years old. And what you notice is not only the beautiful image of the boy, grief-stricken, but also actually how cheap the stadium looks. I mean, this was such a Cinderella story, wasn't it? This was a team that came from nothing with very little money, and the superstars of Brazilian football were playing elsewhere. It was such a great story until now.
Well, 10 years ago, Chapecoense nearly stopped existing, and they weren't even part of Brazil's 4 professional divisions at that time. It's a relatively small town. That stadium that you're referring to is so small that the second leg of the final, they were travelling up to Medellin for the first leg of the final against Atlético Nacional of Colombia. The second leg, which would have been in Brazil next week, they couldn't stage that in their own stadium because it was deemed too small. So their supporters would have had to have travelled some 250 miles to another stadium. So this really was a fairy tale story. There's an article on the website of CONMEBOL. CONMEBOL is the South American equivalent of UEFA. It's the football organising body here. And there's an article on its website that with the title, "The Adventure of Chapecoense Astonishes a Continent." And unfortunately, this latest tragic, deeply horrific turn in the adventure has indeed astonished not just a continent, but the world. And the world of footballers has really felt this. I think footballers and football clubs and football journalists and so on, wherever they're from, they can all relate to this because they have a tendency to get on a lot of planes. So we've really seen an emotional response from a global football family. And no more so than, obviously, the 2 clubs involved. And as we speak, that stadium there in Chapecó, the Arena Condá, is full. That's where the people have flocked. It's where they need to be together, feeling their loss on a collective basis. The stadium in Medellin, where the game was to have taken place tomorrow, Atlético Nacional there will open the doors of their stadium at the time when the game would have taken place, and they are calling their supporters to come, flock to the stadium to pay tribute to those who have lost their lives. And Atlético Nacional have made a formal offer, a formal request rather, to the authorities that the trophy be handed to Chapecoense. It's a magnificent gesture because that is not just a symbolic tribute to those who lost their lives. It also has practical consequences. It means that Chapecoense qualify for the main event in club football in this part of the world. It's called the Copa Libertadores. It's our version of the Champions League. So it guarantees Chapecoense revenue, and that they badly need now to restructure, to go through the difficult business of reconstructing their club. I know that these things at this stage are not the priority. The priority is treating those 6 survivors, some of whom it seems have very severe injuries, and recovering and identifying the bodies of the 71 people who lost their lives. But we also need to look beyond that, and I think this gesture by Atlético Nacional really emphasises and exemplifies the solidarity which is coming from the football community all across the world.
That's the BBC's veteran South American correspondent, a soccer correspondent, Tim Vickery, talking about a team he covered, a Cinderella kind of story until that terrible tragedy. And men he knew, journalists, commentators that he knew and were amongst his friends. It's 5:23 on Checkpoint. Thank you for being with us on RNZ. Coming up, vehicles got into Kaikoura but not out. As bad weather closes that inland road, it is still a precarious proposition, particularly with rocks overhanging it. Southland reveals plans to attract 10,000 more people to the region. Perhaps you are amongst them. If you'd like to share your opinions about the sealing of the Pike River mine or anything else on the program tonight, we'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. But there are a number of options. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Lots of feedback coming in about Solid Energy's reluctance to front. People are saying they should front. Thank you for your feedback and thank you for listening. It's coming up to 5:25. A man fishing in the Kaipara Harbour on the afternoon the Francis sunk says the disaster could have been much worse because 21 people were originally due to be out fishing that day. 7 people drowned and 1 is still missing after the charter boat capsized on Saturday. But Taia Williams says it could have been worse if 10 others hadn't pulled out at the last minute. He spoke to our reporter Alex Ashton.
At about 1 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, Taia Williams was on a fishing boat in the Kaipara Harbour. His captain received a call from the Francis skipper, the late Bill McNatty, from across the bar.
Received a call from Bill that they are on their way back. They were sailing at 2 knots. So how fast is 2 knots? And what he was saying, he doesn't think they can cross the bar.
Taia Williams' vessel waited inside the harbour, keeping watch for the Francis as it tried to get back over the bar. Hours passed, a rescue chopper went overhead, then the call came from the police.
Captain saying that they found the boat, it went over, and they found 6 bodies, 3 alive and 3 dead, and then another 5 missing. Yeah.
Some of those known by Mr Williams' fellow Cook Islander Fred Masters and Irepa, who survived the tragedy. Taia Williams says 10 more people were due to be on board the Francis that day, including his 2 brothers.
There were 21 going on the Francis, and then all these people suddenly pull out, just like my 2 brothers. Well, my brother, he decided about 2 weeks ago, he knew something's not right. These other 6 people, they say they can't make it.
He says 2 more were late to the wharf that morning, due to go out on the Francis, but ended up on his boat. Some are questioning why the Francis skipper, Bill McNatty, went over the bar that day in such rough conditions. And another Kaipara skipper says he'd previously raised concern with Mr McNatty's operation. Taia Williams didn't know Bill McNatty and has never been out with him, but he's heard those concerns.
My friends and my brother telling me funny stories about him.
Funny how?
Like he takes the risk, he doesn't care and all that. That's all I can say, but
yeah.
To me, when I hear these stories, it's Francis, a disaster waiting to happen.
Taia Williams has one hope from this tragedy, that now, when people go out in the Kaipara Harbour, they wear a life jacket. And he says, out of respect to the families of the deceased, he's staying out of the water for at least the rest of the year. Meanwhile, the police are still searching for Taulangi Awhamasaga, who's been missing since the Francis capsized. For Checkpoint, Alex Ashton.
Just before we move on, we've just received an emailed statement from the Breakers, the basketball team, of course, and they say the club is aware of an incident involving Corey Webster last night and his subsequent arrest on an alleged minor assault charge. The club is making further inquiries into what occurred and has no further comment to make at this stage, but will, however, address this incident with the media once further information is available. So it looks like the Breakers are telling us that Corey Webster was arrested on an alleged minor assault charge last night. If we hear any more, we will, of course, let you know. The first convoy of private cars snaked its way into quake-isolated Kaikoura today along the rugged inland route, but bad weather meant the return southbound journey had to be abandoned. The group of 50 cars, vans and utes endured the bumpy 4-hour drive from Mount Lyford this morning, with some looking forward to being reunited with their families for the first time since the quake 17 days ago. But an attempt for a mid-afternoon southbound convoy out of Kaikoura was delayed and then finally cancelled due to the risk of rock falls from above onto the road as poor weather set in. Eva Corlett filed this report.
The road's really good, yeah. There's just a couple of slips that they sort of need to make sure that you're safe when you go under, but
Yeah, no, it's fine.
There's people sort of ferrying you through the worst of it, but I got the feeling if there's major rain or shaking, there's more to move, more to come down.
Camper van owners went in to pick up their abandoned vans, teenagers returned to their families, and workers transported supplies and snacks to their crews. 16-year-old Savannah Manawatu was evacuated at the last minute from the area 2 weeks ago, while her parents stayed behind.
I've been a bit nervous for them and scared in case another one hit, but they've been sweet as. I've been talking to them almost every day, so it's been good. I can't wait to see them though. It's like quite a big decision. It was kind of last minute. I only found out like a half an hour before I left. But yeah, I'm glad I did go though. I feel way better for it.
A crew of Hydrotech workers were en route to assess damage to wastewater and stormwater systems. But its business development consultant, Mark Hughes, says their motivation went beyond their standard duties.
Just to be able to bring them some home comforts as well. Things are pretty expensive from what I understand in there at the moment. Good home-cooked steak. Good, not what this guy's got in the back of his ute, I can tell you that. And fresh veggies.
The 44-kilometre long road was restricted to light vehicles only today. Fonterra's Libby Sutherland says getting the road ready for trucks is a priority for the region's farmers.
We've got stock water and we've got all the cows are getting milked and they've got power back on. So the biggest thing for them is just getting the road open so they can get the milk tankers in.
Another pair who had a surfboard in tow were looking forward to seeing family and friends. Boat owner Craig Burrell, who owns a batch in Kaikoura's South Bay, is heading back to pick up an essential item.
I was up there when the quakes actually happened. Yeah, so I actually took my boat back to Christchurch. So that's what me and 3 other people back to Christchurch. So I really need to get up there and get my boat trailer so I can get the boat out of the water.
Mr Burrell's travelling companion, Charles Neal, was at boarding school during the quake and will reunite with his parents for the first time since then. Mr Neal says he's also keen to check out the new surf breaks.
There's one just outside our house with the new reef come up. It would be pretty good, even for diving, just later on, maybe after Christmas or so, just to explore the new reefs and see what's come up.
The Transport Agency says supervised convoys will continue every day, depending on the weather and aftershocks. It will alternate the days between light and heavy vehicles, with weekends reserved for essential services and the Defence Force. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, ko Eva Corlett tēnei.
You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Coming up on the program before 6 o'clock, Nona has business headlines next. Kaikoura Moteliers offer plane and helicopter subsidies as an incentive to attract tourists to the area. Former US Open champion and Rio Olympic silver medalist Juan Martín del Potro will headline the men's draw for the ASB Tennis Classic in January. Gosh, they're getting some good draws, aren't they? The women's is going to be fantastic. Before all of that, though, here's Katrina Batten with the RNZ headlines.
A high risk of rockfalls and landslides has caused the cancellation of this afternoon's convoy out of Kaikoura. 43 vehicles travelled north into Kaikoura this morning and about 50 vehicles were registered to leave the town this afternoon. The Transport Agency says wet weather has significantly increased the risk of rockfalls and landslides on the already fragile route, making it unsafe for travel. The Social Development Minister is standing by the way the government's dealing with claims of abuse from former children in state care. The ministry is taking a case-by-case approach, but a judge who heard from about 1,000 victims wants an independent inquiry and a formal apology to those who suffered abuse. The Minister, Anne Tolley, has defended the process in Parliament. New Zealand, Egypt and Spain have tabled a joint resolution on the Syrian crisis with the United Nations Security Council demanding a ceasefire for the besieged city of Aleppo. The Foreign Minister, Murray McCulley, says it follows negotiations with council members over the past fortnight. The wife of one of the men who died in the Pike River mine explosions, Anna Osborne, says a meeting with Solid Energy today was a total waste of time and the company is trying to pass the buck. The Chief Executive, Tony King, met with several family members of the 29 men who died in the mine in 2010. Protesters will return to the entrance of the mine tomorrow to continue fighting moves to have it sealed. A volcanologist says a small geyser eruption near Rotorua early this afternoon may be weather-related. Water bubbled up to about 1 metre in height and about 3 metres in diameter in a bay near Ohinimutu village. Brad Scott says it may have arisen as a result of a low-pressure weather system which came through the area about 3. It is 25 and a half minutes to 6, and I'll be back at 6 with more news and sport and weather.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier. Nona, hi Nona. The Reserve Bank released its half-yearly financial stability report today.
That's right, and it showed up very few surprises there. In fact, nothing really of surprise. However, a very good overall checkup for the financial stability of New Zealand, although there are some threats.
The Reserve Bank, though, its mandate, one of its mandates is financial stability, right?
Right, so if they had found some, could have been a problem.
If they run screaming from the room, we're in serious trouble.
So you expect a kind of steady as she goes kind of report. No surprises is really good.
Although they experimented a little bit with some stuff around the Auckland property market, didn't they? Much earlier in the year.
They have actually identified some threats, and one of them is the Auckland housing market. Hot housing prices, not just in Auckland, but elsewhere too. Rising interest rates is a problem. And the dairy sector debt.
Right.
So those three things combined. We've got a lot of people carrying a lot of debt. Dairy farmers are one group that definitely have been carrying a lot of debt. So even though dairy prices have improved, it's going to put the dairy farmers under risk of any kind of future shock. It's going to be difficult for them to weather through that because they're already carrying a lot of debt. Also, homeowners, people who have been buying into the housing market, interest rates are moving up for sure, not moving down anymore. And so, when they come to refinance and so on, they could find themselves in some trouble there as well.
So this is singing from the same song sheet as the government. The government's saying the same thing, right? Bill English, Nick Smith, right.
So this is a risk. And of course, these things, plus the housing market, there's always the chance that it's going to continue to grow even hotter, I suppose. And so these things all together concern the Reserve Bank. But overall, analysts had a look and they said, hey, it's a pretty good report overall. So steady as she goes for New Zealand. And, we had some other data that kind of supported that.
I see, because you've written it for me, the NZIER, so the Institute of Economic Research, right?
Yeah, so their predictions are quite positive for the New Zealand economy. It says the New Zealand economy is actually quite resilient to external shocks. So the Donald Trump uncertainty that has caused, quite a lot of, nervousness, jitters in the world markets, less so in New Zealand, seems to be quite steady here. And the earthquakes, that's really, in a lot of countries, if something like that happened, goodness me, it could have been really quite severe to the overall economic outlook. But the NZIER thinks that particular impact will be felt in the regions where the damage occurred and not widespread. So yes, there will be some, of course, issues with that, but not across the country.
We're about to talk about that, actually.
So nice lead-in, right?
Nice lead-in. Nona, tell us about the markets. What do they do today?
So just before I leave the NZIER, they're expecting economic growth to average above 3% for the next 5 years. That's pretty good. So the top 50 index was barely changed. It was down just 5 points to 6,897. The dollar's trading a little bit higher at 71.4 US cents, 95.6 Australian, and 57.2 pence.
Nona Peltier, thank you so much. Nona, talking about the impact of the earthquakes on the regions where it occurred. First and foremost amongst them, Kaikoura, of course, where accommodation owners say they're facing a grim summer as holidaymakers do cancel their bookings at an alarming rate. And in some cases, they are doing so months ahead. In response, moteliers have banded together to offer plane and helicopter subsidies as an incentive to attract tourists, and some operators are even bringing clean sheets in, which is a nice thought, by fishing boat. Phil Pennington reports.
The afterquake pain is worsening for hundreds of people whose livelihoods rely on tourists. The 5-star Fairways Apartments on Ocean Ridge, just south of town, has already lost $60,000 in bookings since November the 14th. At the Goose Bay Motor Camp, which is still evacuated, half of all bookings have been cancelled. Liz and John Marnie leased the camp from Ngaitahu, but can't even stay in their house there, given the threat from water building up behind a landslip upstream.
Over the last 2 or 3 days, I've sent, I don't know how many emails I've sent cancelling them. It must be at least 20-odd that I've cancelled. And no doubt there's going to be more. We've even got people cancelling in January.
Liz Marnie sounds a common call of desperation to get a clearer steer from authorities on just when State Highway 1 to Christchurch might reopen. It's a similar story to the north. The Camp Kekarengu glamping site is halfway between Kaikoura and Blenheim. It's undamaged, but Liz Henderson, who takes the bookings, says people are cancelling there too.
Any domestic bookings that were Christchurch-based have cancelled, mainly due to just being traumatised by the quakes, being scared, or their children being scared, or just feeling not like they just don't want to leave home right now.
Cape Kekarengu's owners, Pip Toddhunter and husband Simon, say whilst they have had some Filipino tourists prepared to drive 8 hours from Christchurch to reach them, they regret spending $100,000 on the business last summer.
In hindsight, if we knew that road was going to be closed, we wouldn't do it. We were fully booked pretty much every night from sort of a couple of weeks ago right through to the middle of January. We only had a couple of spare nights, but now we have had a huge amount of cancellations due to the road.
Gateway Motor Lodge owner Kathy Christian only took over the business 4 months ago after moving to Kaikoura from Timaru. She's now among worried operators who formed a group to find ways to get supplies in and lure tourists back.
We've had hundreds and hundreds of cancellations for the next couple of months.
Kathy's had just one delivery of clean sheets since the quake. Her linen provider, Bays Laundry in Motueka, used a fishing boat a couple of days ago to get them in. She says for now the Gateway, Bella Vista and Lobster Inn are chocker with emergency workers, but the quake has been a blow to her fortunes.
We've got communication type people, which is broad spectrum and chorus personnel. I have relief ambulance staff. Some of them are sort of slowing down now. Once they've done their thing, they'll head back home. And then what happens after that, I'm not sure.
At $1,000 a night, the Hapuku Lodge and Tree Houses aims to reopen next week, with a reduction of $250 towards the cost of a private plane or helicopter to get there. General Manager Chris Sturgeon says it's vital to keep his 19 staff, including his chefs, employed until things pick up.
We would have certainly lost a good 50% of our bookings in December, but we're only down just on 19% of our bookings for January. We've seen in the vicinity of a good dozen, maybe 20 requests for accommodation in December and January of people wanting to come. Recognising that Kaikoura needs support.
Not so much support, though, for the backpacker end of the market. The Lazy Shag backpackers and Top Spot backpackers have cancelled all their bookings until the end of January. And Bad Jelly backpackers Mike Toney says he's losing all the nights he had lined up in December. For Checkpoint, Phil Pennington.
Thanks, Phil. 18 minutes to 6. Lots and lots of feedback coming in on Pike, and it is varied and polarised. Here is a sample. Read the Pike River mine. I smell a rat. What's being covered up? Solid Energy wants the Pike River mine sealed because they want the evidence of the reason for that disaster to be sealed. Corporate irresponsibility and evasive behaviour. Says Mike, hi John, I feel for the families of Pike River. Broken promises from our government and Solid Energy, a government puppet to stonewall these families. What are they hiding and what is their mandate and why? On the other hand, John, the rest of New Zealand is over-capitalised. The whinging West Coast miners' families, please find another bone, says one person. Enough with the Pike River families. The men are dead. My word, this issue is boring, says another person. And then back to the other side. John Key promised they would get the men out. Why is he not fronting? Election looming and the public will relate to the Pike River families. What are they afraid the mine safety group will find? What negligence is Solid Energy covering up? If workers have been there blocking it, could they have seen the bodies who should have made it out safely if safety was up to scratch? Bring the men home as promised. Stop buying anything related to Solid Energy. And finally, they're all by text. And finally, this email from Judith and Nelson. There's an irony about Solid Energy wanting to seal the mine with a concrete wall. They've had plenty of practice using that concrete wall constantly to seal any dialogue, any true communication, listening and speaking, repeating the government line ad infinitum. I believe it's past time to show solidarity with the Pike River families, to protest with them. Thank you for all of your feedback. The Social Development Minister is standing firm on the government's decision not to hold an independent inquiry into the abuse of children in state care, saying it's not necessary and the victims don't want one. Judge Carolyn Henwood, who headed a panel that heard from more than 1,100 abuse victims, has recommended an independent inquiry to discover the extent of the abuse, monitor the care of the children and investigate complaints. Opposition parties are demanding an inquiry and a full and formal apology to the victims, but Anne Tolley says that is not necessary. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The Social Development Minister Anne Tolley says only 3.5% of children in care have made claims, and many just want a personal apology with compensation in some cases. But Labour's Jacinda Ardern says many of the victims who appeared before the panel believed the government would carry through with its recommendations. She says the result has been extremely disappointing and those victims have been let down.
What's key in there is the need for independence. Now, whether or not victims feel the need for there to be a broader inquiry, what is absolutely certain is that they feel the need for independence in the way that claims are being dealt with. And that's for good reason. They're making claims against the state, and it's the state who's investigating them.
The Greens co-leader Materia Tude says Mrs Tolley should reconsider.
She must not deny the reality, the terrible trauma that thousands of New Zealand's children who are now parents and have children of their own have suffered as a result of government abuse when they were in care.
In Parliament, the Minister defended the government's approach.
Last year I introduced a fast-track process that gives claimants an option to have their claims resolved faster while still receiving an apology and, if they want, a financial settlement. Around 900 payments have been made to date, totalling more than $17 million.
Mrs Tolley told the House there's been a real effort to make the process as simple as possible.
And the fast-track process means it's only fact-checked. There's no investigation. And I've heard from complainants that what they want is recognition that they were abused, which we all find appalling. That they want the state to take responsibility for that.
Mrs Tolley says the new Ministry for Vulnerable Children will consider establishing an independent complaint service to ensure children in care are monitored and to make sure there is accountability for any failures of government agencies. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
14 minutes to 6, the last moments of Greg McPeak's life, captured on cameras inside police tasers as officers tried to pull him from his car, was shown in court today. The footage was played at the Napier District Court, where 4 officers with name suppression have denied assaulting Mr McPeak with weapons in March of last year. It shows police officers repeatedly ordering Mr McPeak out of his car moments before 2 officers fired tasers and police dogs were let loose in his small SUV. Our court reporter Edward Gay filed this report.
Neighbours who heard the incident described hearing a calm voice repeatedly telling Greg McPeak he was under arrest and to get out of his vehicle. It was 1 a.m. and police had caught up with Mr McPeak after he'd beaten his elderly father with a baton-like weapon. When the 179-kilogram man refused to get out of his car, 2 teams of officers approached from each side, smashing his windows and pepper spraying him before firing tasers and setting dogs on him. At one point in the 3 minutes of footage, Mr McPeak can be seen with his hand over a dog's muzzle and he's later heard groaning. Mr McPeak was pulled from his car and became unresponsive. He died a short time later, but the court's been told his death had nothing to do with the actions of the police. Earlier today, Greg McPeak's daughter, Bianca, said her father drank alcohol to deal with his problems and had attended Alcoholics Anonymous meetings in the past, but always returned to the bottle. He had a distant relationship with his parents, who he blamed for his problems. Miss McPeak said her last contact with her dad was via text message, read by Crown Prosecutor Ben Vanderkolk.
Did he say, all good, been at Barry's, no reception, love ya, D?
Yes.
Okay, text from your father. Is that the usual type of communication that you would have with each other?
Not really, no.
Okay. Barry, who's Barry? Who do you understand Barry to be?
I just need a second, sorry.
Just take some water.
Miss McPeak said sometimes her father would talk of killing his father and brother. He would also say if his health got too much, he'd park up near some water and take his own life. But she thought that was just ranting. She was also asked about her father owning a crossbow. The evidence is important as officers have told the court that on the night they believed Mr McPeak could have been armed.
He's always sort of had one that, hunt or whatever men do, but so I knew that he had owned one, but I didn't know whether he still had it or not.
She confirmed she had not seen him handling the weapon for years. Jonathan Villian was a constable on the night. He's since left the police, but he was first on the scene at Napier's West Shore where Mr McPeak's car was found parked up. He called for backup and then drove up the road to lay road spikes to ensure Mr McPeak didn't escape. When he came back to the scene a short time later, Mr McPeak was out of his car.
I saw a large Caucasian male on his side. He was barely clothed, his shirt was ripped. He was on his side and plastic cuffs on his wrists behind him.
He also confirmed he saw one of the defendants giving Mr McPeak CPR before ambulance officers arrived and took over. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi ko Edward Gay aho.
Coming up to 10 to 6, Southland's plan to attract 10,000 more people to the region has been unveiled today, with aquaculture getting the biggest injection of government cash. More than 500 people attended the launch of the Southland Regional Development Strategy in Invercargill this morning, and our reporter Lydia Anderson was among them.
It was the biggest Wednesday morning Invercargill has seen in 30 years, as Southland residents from all sectors of the community packed out the main hall of the Transport World Museum. The Economic Development Minister Stephen Joyce and the Primary Industries Minister Nathan Guy were on hand to announce an injection of $2.4 million to kickstart a variety of projects. Mr Joyce was quick to praise Southland's initiative.
Southland came to us and said, look, we're doing a regional growth strategy. Would you guys like to be part of it? Because we're getting on with it and we're getting it done, and you can join in and help us. And that's a great attitude, and I think a tribute to the people that you've got involved in this project.
Strategy Chair John Campbell says the first step in getting people to move to Southland is making them realise it exists.
The issue really is, what is it about us that's going to want to make people come here and hopefully also bring their money here for investment? And you know, we just need to set about doing that better.
Southland District Mayor Gary Tong says the strategy is more than just warm fuzzies for Southlanders.
It's real. They know that's happening. There's people been hanging out for something to happen in this region, and this is the start of the process.
A major focus is the growth of aquaculture, and the government has committed $750,000 to identifying suitable sites for producing high-quality seafood in Stewart Island. Tourism, which is lagging behind other regions, gets a government injection of more than $500,000, including money towards a feasibility study for an attraction called Bluff Oyster World. Gore Mayor Tracy Hicks says now it's time for action.
Unless we get off our chuff and do something, we're not going to have the people coming through to pick up the services and run the businesses that we already have, let alone develop new ones.
The hundreds of people who came to hear today's announcement were right behind the vision for Southland's future, including Margot Hishin from Southland's Community Trust.
I'm inspired. Yes, it's lovely to have such a positive group of people together, and they all want to see Southland shine. We can't miss.
Other key points in the 10-year strategy include the rejuvenation of Invercargill and encouraging more cultural diversity in the region. In Invercargill for Checkpoint, Lydia Anderson.
The former US Open champion and Rio Olympic silver medalist Juan Martín del Potro will head the men's draw for the ASB Tennis Classic in Auckland in January. Del Potro was out of the game for nearly 2 years due to 3 wrist surgeries, but he returned to this game this season and climbed from world number 1,145 to his current ranking of 38. The defending champion, who is a Spaniard and an American, are the top seeds for the tournament. But as tournament director Carl Budge told Matt Chatterton, it's Del Potro who'll turn heads.
On form, he's probably the best player that's come to the ASB Classic men's field. While we've had players ranked higher, I'm not sure we would have had anyone at his level. You know, if you think of who's going to be the favourites to win the Australian Open, I dare suggest Juan Martín will be in the top 2 or 3 favourites for that tournament. And so to have him in that sort of form coming here, yeah, he's our top 10 player. And look, I think along with Andy Murray, he's probably been the form player of this year.
And taking a look at the rest of the field, on paper, it would almost appear that it's stronger than the women's, where you're cut off for your seeded players, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it's the contrast I think so exciting. You know, you've got massive servers in the likes of Isner and Vesely. You've got the 2 biggest forehands in tennis, and Del Potro and Jack Sock, and then the real crafty, you know, the great defensive and returning players of the likes of Herrera and Bautista. So, look, I think when you put all of that together, plus the 2 young guys we've got coming through that are the stars of tomorrow, you know, all of our defending champions since 2009, it starts to become a pretty compelling field.
Yes, it certainly does. Very exciting. More and more New Zealanders with hepatitis C are importing generic treatments which are curing them of the virus and giving them a new lease of life. Funded treatment for hepatitis C sufferers was recently made available in New Zealand, but only people with a particular strand of the virus can access it easily. That's about half of all sufferers. Here's Lydia Anderson again, reporting on how the other half live.
Dunedin woman Hazel Hill is loving life now she's cured of hepatitis C. After living with the virus for 30 years, Ms. Hill started using generic treatments last year and has been cured for the past 6 months.
Physically, I feel heaps younger, like it's something I don't think many people get to experience, is to age and get to over 50 and everyone around me is tighter and I'm a box of birds.
Ms. Hill has genotype 3 hepatitis C and was told last year she could fund her own treatment for about $115,000. She found she could buy the medication she needed through an Australian doctor for a fraction of the price, just a little over $2,000 per treatment. Pharmac's funding regime is now more widely available in New Zealand, but people who don't qualify are turning to generics. The medications, produced in India and made available through the Fix Hep C Buyers Club, set up by Tasmanian GP Dr James Freeman, have drastically improved Ms. Hill and other Kiwis' quality of life. Fellow Dunedin woman Tina Hill is also 6 months free of the virus and its symptoms after 12 years. She says it's only now she's cured she realises how sick she was.
A lot of fatigue, very irritable as well. People don't realise there's a lot of extra manifestations of Hep C. It's not just localised to your liver. It affects your mental health, it affects your physical and spiritual well-being, and also just your general output.
Both women had to travel to Australia to Dr Freeman's clinic to collect their treatment. But MedSafe says sufferers can now directly import the generic medications into New Zealand with a GP's prescription. Dr Freeman has paid a flying visit to Dunedin to meet grateful patients and says hundreds of Kiwis are using his services. He says treatment for all hepatitis C genotypes costs from about $2,000. Once patients have a GP's prescription, they can go online to arrange treatment delivery to New Zealand through the Buyers Club.
They can have their local doctor both prescribe it and look after them so that cure is available. And unfortunately, there's this price around it, but for those that can afford it, they can actually be cured without having to wait.
He says one of the biggest problems is about half of Kiwis with hepatitis C don't know they have it.
There'll be over 50,000 New Zealanders with Hep C. They'll be mostly baby boomers, so they'll be, in the age range 45 to 65. They'll be getting a bit older and they'll be putting a lot of their symptoms down to I'm just getting older, when in fact it's a disease underlying it.
He is urging people to get checked next time they visit their GP, particularly if they've been exposed to unsterile tattoo equipment or had a blood transfusion before 1992. In Dunedin for Checkpoint, Lydia Anderson.
It is 2.5 minutes to 6. Katrina has just arrived bearing the 6 o'clock news, which is obviously 2.5 minutes away. We don't miss a trick here at Checkpoint. But lots of feedback coming in on Pike. Thank you for it all. Steve from the Esk Valley says, hello John, read the Pike mine. Not really into conspiracy theories, but what the hell is in that mine that the state is so determined to hide? Or is this simply a result of OSH and the reality in our society that any form of bravery or going beyond the normal risk in a good cause is no longer acceptable? Very sad for the families, and I for one will never buy any solid energy product again. All the best. Thank you, Steve. Verna says, good afternoon, John. I live in the rural fringes of Auckland, so a very long way away from Pike River. I just remember the promise made by John Key following the disaster at Pike. We will get the men out whatever it takes. I grew up with the understanding that a promise made was to be honoured. If you are unsure of your ability to carry through, you do not make the promise. People hold on to words of comfort and reassurance. Where are those words now? Kind regards, Verna. And this is a very sweet message we have received. John Campbell, we are very concerned about the Pike River situation. As pensioners, would $1,000 help the cause? I don't think they're asking for money, but I'm sure they will be delighted to hear you offering it. Thank you, and thank you for all your feedback. We do appreciate it. You can email us, checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, or text 2101. That was an extended mix of the sting. We're all thoroughly enjoying it. After 6 tonight, many of Wellington's bars and restaurants closed due to the quake say they are worried the government's quake relief plan isn't enough. The football world mourns the loss of an almost entire Brazilian soccer team involved in a plane crash in Colombia. And Solid Energy tells the families directly at a meeting in Greymouth today, a teleconference too with some of them in Christchurch, it is proceeding with its plans to seal the mine permanently. All of that and more. But let's enjoy the pips and then the news with Katrina.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. A high risk of rockfalls and landslides has seen this afternoon's convoy out of Kaikoura cancelled. 43 vehicles travelled north into Kaikoura this morning and about 50 vehicles were registered to leave the town this afternoon. The Transport Agency Regional Performance Manager Pete Connors says wet weather has significantly increased the risk of rockfalls and landslides on the already fragile route, making it unsafe for travel. Mr Connors says while people will be disappointed, the risk was just too high to allow vehicles through this afternoon. People who were registered on today's southbound convoy for light vehicles should register for the next one, which leaves on Friday at 2 p.m. The road will be open for 2 convoys tomorrow, but for heavy vehicles only. The Greens have added their voice to calls for an independent inquiry into the abuse of children in state care and a formal apology to all the victims. Judge Carolyn Henwood, who headed a panel hearing from more than 1,000 people, recommended the inquiry to discover the extent of the abuse. The Social Development Minister, Anne Tolley, says the government will not make a universal apology and has ruled out an independent inquiry. The Greens co-leader, Materia Ture, says she should reconsider.
She must not deny the reality, the terrible trauma that thousands of New Zealand's children, who are now parents and have children of their own, have suffered as a result of government abuse when they were in care.
The Green Party's Materia Ture. A spokesperson for some of the Pike River families, Bernie Monk, says the protesters will return to the entrance of the mine tomorrow to continue fighting moves to have it sealed. 3 of the family members of the 29 men who died in the mine explosions in 2010 today met with the chief executive of Solid Energy, which now owns the mine. Mr Monk, whose son Michael died in the mine, says the meeting was a disaster and they felt Solid Energy had no interest in listening to them. He says family members will keep protesting at the gate to the mine and the gates of Parliament until they get justice for their men.
I think it's gutless what Solid Energy are doing, and I think it's unheard of anywhere else in the world to actually send men underground and leave them there, and I just find that so frustrating that they're doing that.
A Pike River mine family spokesperson, Bernie Monk, Solid Energy has not been available for comment. Tens of thousands of people in the Brazilian town of Chapecó have been paying homage to the victims of the plane crash in Colombia, in which most of the town's football team were killed. Supporters of the Chapecoense football team walked from the town centre to the stadium, where they sang, prayed and applauded the team. The BBC's Camilla Costa has more.
They just filled the stadium, paying a tribute to their team. It was quite an emotional moment because many of them felt like they were coming to watch a match, but their team wasn't there. They chanted for the team, they chanted the Chapecoense hymn, and now they're going home. Many of them crying and, still very hurt and not believing what has happened.
Camilla Costa in Chapecó, southern Brazil. New Zealand, Egypt and Spain have tabled a joint resolution on the Syrian crisis with the United Nations Security Council demanding a ceasefire for the besieged city of Aleppo. The Foreign Minister, Murray McCulley, says it follows negotiations with Council members over the past fortnight. He says the resolution spells out the need for a ceasefire, humanitarian access and a resumption of negotiations in Syria. Mr McCulley says pressure needs to be put on those perpetrating the violence in Syria, and he says if they're not willing to change their behaviour, they have to accept the international condemnation and resultant isolation. Mr McCulley says New Zealand would like a vote on the resolution as soon as possible. A volcanologist says a small geyser eruption near Rotorua earlier this afternoon may be weather-related. Those who saw the geyser explode say the water bubbled up to about 1 metre in height and about 3 metres in diameter. Brad Scott, who works for GNS Science at Wairake, says the eruption occurred in one of Lake Rotorua's bays near Ohinemutu village. He says it may have arisen as a result of a low-pressure weather system which came through the area around 3 this afternoon.
When you lower the barometric pressure, you just basically take weight off the geothermal system, and that allows more steam to come through. And if a hot spring is on the verge of erupting, it can just let it erupt.
Brad Scott says if a hot spring is on the verge of erupting, in those conditions, the drop in air pressure will cause that to occur. It's 6:05. The New Zealand Breakers basketball player Corey Webster was arrested following an incident at an Auckland bar last night. Webster was involved in an alleged assault. It was Webster's 28th birthday yesterday. In 2011, he was released from his contract with the Breakers due to a drug violation and re-signed with them in 2012. The New Zealand cricket captain Kane Williamson says they'll take plenty of confidence from their thrilling second test win over Pakistan into the one-day series in Australia. The ODI squad is on its way to Australia to defend their title in the 3-match Chappell-Hadley series, which starts in Sydney on Sunday. Australia have just come off a humbling test series loss to South Africa at home, though they did win the final match. Williamson says they'll be a typically tough prospect.
They're a quality side in all formats. They've got a lot of depth in their country, so they're always a formidable challenge. The boys are looking forward to going over there. It's, like I say, it's a tough challenge, but two sides have had some really competitive series. The last one was a really nice one for us. We'll have to go over there, adapt to the conditions and be better.
Kane Williamson. And 17-year-old Ben Woodburn became Liverpool's youngest ever goal scorer as he found the net in their 2-0 win over Leeds to reach English football's League Cup semi-finals. Hull beat Newcastle in today's other quarter-final. That's the news.
The government's blasted for its handling of child abuse claims.
There's not a shred of empathy or acknowledgement to the 1,100 New Zealanders that came forward about their concerns, and no responsibility taken.
The Minister responds.
Nothing can ever make up for the damage that was done to those people, but the feedback that I have had from them is that they are relieved that someone has listened to them.
The survivors speak out.
As a victim of this, I find this absolutely disgusting.
The Care of the State. Morning reports, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, radical approaches to drug addiction, including fix rooms, supervised meth inhalation and total legalisation. And after 10, speaking of drugs, he played Walter White in the smash series Breaking Bad, award-winning actor Bryan Cranston. Join me, Lynn Freeman, and for Catherine Ryan after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Cloudy periods, isolated showers developing tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, scattered showers developing. Some may be heavy until tonight. Waikato to Wellington, including the central high country, cloudy with scattered rain spreading north, becoming fine tomorrow morning. Wairarapa, occasional rain easing to isolated showers tomorrow morning. For Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, mainly fine. Areas of morning cloud tomorrow in Nelson. Marlborough, cloudy with a few showers, clearing tomorrow morning. Canterbury, mostly cloudy with isolated showers, rain developing tomorrow night. Otago, mostly fine, isolated showers in eastern areas. Southland, cloudy periods and diffuse showers, becoming confined to the coast this evening. And the Chatham Islands, fine spells and diffuse showers, clearing tomorrow. It's just gone 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. Representatives of Pike Families met with Solid Energy CEO this afternoon in an attempt to persuade the company to not permanently seal the mine. The first explosion 6 years ago this month occurred as the shift was changing, and some family members believe there may be bodies in the drift and they want access to it. Former miners and mines rescue personnel from both New Zealand and overseas are prepared to go in. They have publicly stated that, including on this program. They don't believe their lives would be at risk, but if the proposed seal does go in, that may never happen. Today, Solid Energy told the families directly it is proceeding with the seal, full stop. We have tried tremendously hard to get an interview on this with Solid Energy, and they are refusing to front. Tommy Daly was a close friend of Milton Osborne, a council worker who died in the mine. In fact, a regional councillor who died in the mine. He joined other Pike River family members and their supporters who held a vigil at the memorial site yesterday.
We aren't going to give up until someone says that's it. And really, I made a promise to a little lady about 6 years ago, and I'm going through with that one, and haven't given up yet. So we just got to hope.
Who did you make the promise to, Tommy?
Well, Mrs. Osborne, of course.
Milton's Anna, yeah.
Yep.
And what did you promise her?
I wasn't going away until I thought it was time, and it's not that time yet. You know, we haven't given up on checking this drift out yet, because who knows what's up that drift, because nobody's had a look. You know, the last people to come out of there were Daniel, and he picked up Russell on the way out, you know, and nobody else has been in there to have a look, and there could be an SMV sitting there waiting to come out, you know. You just don't know. It's not much to ask. I mean, I think it's been estimated it's about a 3-hour walk, you know, an hour and a half there and an hour and a half back, or a bit less. It's not much to ask for the families, because they've put up with a lot of shit over 6 years, you know, and I don't know. It's just got to, it's not much to ask really for them to go and have a look. And then they'd say, well, at least you've tried, you know. I mean, it's, to this day and age, it's disgraceful, really, to even say you're a New Zealander. From what, you know, it's crap, I suppose, is the best word.
Did you hear Harold Gibbons on our program from Mines Rescue, a man with a huge weight of experience in both Pike and Spring Creek, a former Mines Rescue worker who said he would be absolutely prepared to go up the drift, and that he didn't think he would be risking his life to do so, and that other Mines Rescue men would go with him. Have you heard that? Have the Pike families heard Harold saying that, and what's the response to it?
Yeah, and I mean, anybody that knows Harold on the West Coast, he's always, even before Pike happened at Spring Creek, he always put safety first, because he was a safety inspector there as well for each team, and he was the union rep as well, and safety always comes first with Harold, and he wouldn't say, you know, that unless he knew he could do it. And I'd put my life in Harold's hands any days, because he's got the experience, and he's got what a lot of people haven't got today, and it's, you know, common sense. I mean, like Harold said, if they go in, it will be a straight, let's walk as far up towards the slip as we can and have a look and come back. I mean, if you're a betting man, you would say there was a person or people in that drift, you know, and they won't be worried about the evidence. They'll be going in there to do that job, and that job only. So I honestly can't see why people are worried. I mean, imagine getting one person's remains out of that drift. The families would be, I mean, it would be the best news you could get, you know, even though it would be horrible for the rest of the families. It will be closure for one family. What else can you ask for?
It's Tommy Daly, a friend of Milton Osborne, whose body is in the mine. Milton's wife, Anna, was part of that conference call today with the Solid Energy CEO, and she was very disappointed, which is probably understating her reaction to what she was told. We spoke to Bernie Monk earlier, and that interview is online if you want to hear it. The football world is mourning the loss of almost an entire Brazilian soccer team involved in a plane crash in Colombia. The team was on a plane that claimed 71 lives when it slammed into a hillside near the city of Medellin last night. The tragedy ends what had been a real Cinderella story for the underdog club and its players, who were on their way to play in their first big competition final. No superstars, but some magic alchemy in that team. Now they may be granted the champions title posthumously in a show of respect from the opponents they would have on the soccer field. Here's the ABC's Colin Cozier.
On the Chapecoense Football Club's Facebook page, the video shows the team's young men celebrating their last win. The tribute says, "Let this be the last image of our Warriors." Another video shows the team at an airport in Brazil, moments before heading off on the fatal flight. In the footage, the man behind the camera asks the club's director, Caru Gaucho, about the trip's significance.
The most important trip so far. Every year we are able to grow the club's history, and we hope now again, in this unprecedented Sudamericana final, we hope we have a very good first match.
It was the first time the club from a small city in the state of Santa Catarina had made the Copa Sudamericana finals. The Colombian side they were due to play, Atlético Nacional, has offered to concede the game to ensure the Chapecoense team is declared the tournament champion. And even though the games have been cancelled, fans have been asked to dress in white and turn up to the stadium in tribute. Meanwhile, Brazil's president has announced 3 days of national mourning. Some of the world's top football teams have held a minute's silence before their matches, and Brazil's top clubs have offered to lend players to Chapecoense free of charge for the 2017 season. The team's charter plane crashed into a hilly rural area just short of its destination in Medellin, Colombia. Elkin Espina is the mayor of a small town near the crash site.
The crash site is very hard to access. It's raining very hard now in the crash site, and the access is very challenging. It's very sad, not just for Brazil, but for the whole world.
Only 6 of the 77 people on board survived. Authorities say 3 players are among the survivors. The team's goalkeeper was reportedly pulled alive from the wreckage, but later died in hospital. One of the team's players who missed the fatal flight after suffering a knee injury a month ago is struggling with the loss.
It is very difficult thinking that I might have been there. Why I wasn't there. The fact that I wasn't there. It is very difficult. It is too much for my head.
The head of Colombia's civil aviation agency, Alfredo Bocanegra, has blamed the crash on an electrical fault, but says a full investigation is needed.
Obviously, in these types of investigations, we cannot discard other causes. The testimony from survivors will also be valuable. But we're going to have an investigation. In contrast to other plane accidents that happen in distant places, here we have a close accident site.
The agency says both of the plane's flight recorders have been found and are in good condition.
That report from the ABC. Let's head to Wellington now, where the city's bars and restaurants are worried the government's quake relief plan may be too broad and that some businesses will slip through the cracks. They say the package is prescriptive and punishes owners who took out continuity insurance. Here's Emile Donovan.
The relief package is aimed at subsidising staff wages, allowing businesses that are cordoned off and can't operate to still pay their workers. They'll receive $500 for each full-time worker and $300 for part-timers for a maximum of 8 weeks or until their business can start operating again. But there's a catch. Businesses that already have insurance that compensates for lost income don't qualify for relief, nor do businesses able to relocate. The Angus Inn in Lower Hutt, across the road from the Event Cinemas complex, is partially closed while that building is demolished. But because it's partially open, it doesn't qualify for the relief package. Its manager and co-owner, Peter Norrie, says the real losers are at the bottom of the working ladder.
The thousands of part-timers that are involved in our industry who would normally have an enormous amount of work going into Christmas time, and as a result of the quake, of course, there's little or no work out there. They don't get any compensation from anyone, so they're the people that are going to miss out.
A partner at Deloitte, Mike Curtis, says continuity insurance often comes with a high premium to pay, so that unless the business is out of action for a long time, it's not worth claiming.
Because the excess premiums are 5 or 10%, you need to have a disruption of probably 1 to 1.5 months before it's beneficial to make a claim.
Glenn Pitcaithley owns the Greenland Cafe and Environment House. Mr. Pitcaithley, who has relocated, does have continuity insurance, more than $200,000 worth, but he was shocked to learn he'd only be paid out 1/10 of that.
Post-Christchurch earthquake, apparently the insurance companies all just changed their policies, but then if it's an earthquake, they cap it at 10% maximum payout, so $22,000. You can't get up and running again on that sort of payout.
Mike Curtis says the restriction on qualifying for the support package is too restrictive at the moment, and he wants the government to loosen its purse strings.
I'd like to see the government provide relief for those businesses that also have loss of profits insurance. They're suffering just as much as those clients who do not have it.
But the Minister for Economic Development, Stephen Joyce, says it's not the government's job to pay workers' wages if their employer can claim insurance.
I just don't think that the public would expect the government to pay people's wages when businesses do have continuity insurance that can be called on. I just don't think the public would be supportive of that. 17
businesses in Wellington have applied for the relief package so far, with the Ministry of Social Development expecting a marked increase in coming days. And the City Council is launching an earthquake information centre next week to advise businesses on whether they qualify for support. At the moment, there's no deadline on applications. For Checkpoint, ko Emile Donovan Tene.
For people who live outside the capital, it can be a little bewildering trying to keep up with which buildings are out of bounds after the quakes. So, our enterprising reporter Max Toll, armed only with his phone, decided to help. Here's Max's tiki tour of some of Wellington's shaken up buildings.
G'day John, I'm standing inside Wellington's biggest office tower, the Astron Centre on Featherston Street. It's 48,000 square kilometres, it cost $120 million to build, and if you're familiar with Wellington, right opposite me is the Wellington railway station. 5 days ago, this Goliath 15-storey centre was completely evacuated after an engineer's report ruled it unsafe. Interestingly and quite frighteningly, the building was given the all clear initially in an engineer's report. However, the lead tenant, Inland Revenue, demanded a second report, and this time big concerns were raised about cracks in the stairwell. These cracks were first noticed after the 2013 Seddon earthquake. They were fixed, or at least cosmetically fixed, because it now appears the cracks are back. The prognosis for this building was that it would initially only take a few days for the remedial work to be completed. Now there's a recorded 0800 number, and that tells you that people won't be able to return for at least 2 weeks. IRD, meanwhile, has shifted some of its workers to Upper Hutt. It shifted some to Hawkston Street, which is about 3 blocks in front of me, heading inland. It is believed this building is safe and that its stairs wouldn't pancake in a strong aftershock, but at the moment, its owners are saying it's better to be safe than sorry. Alright, I'm now walking down Wakefield Street, which is about 20 minutes across town from the Astron Centre. If you're familiar with Wellington, this is the street where the City Council buildings are located. Now, directly behind me is a massive car park structure which has been completely cordoned off. It looms ominously close to Reading Cinema, which is also behind me. Now, it's not just Reading Cinema that's been affected. There are a handful of shops along Courtney Place. There are about 20 bars, restaurants and cafes, and about 150 people also live in apartments which are very near the complex itself. They've also had to leave their homes. Now, RNZ did speak to the Wellington Mayor. He says it could be 2, 3 or even 4 weeks just before a decision is even made whether the structure needs to be demolished or strengthened with steel. Look, I can laugh about not being able to go to the movies, but for hundreds of people, they need this complex to reopen as soon as possible. This is my last stop, Farmers on Cuba Street. Cuba Street's of course home to the world famous bucket fountain, or at least New Zealand famous bucket fountain. Now, Farmers has been closed since straight after the earthquake. The company, it says it's still waiting for a decision by its engineers on whether it's okay to reopen. You can look inside, there are a few mannequins scattered around the place. I walked past the day after the earthquake and there were 2 mannequins lying in a very unfortunate and suggestive position. I'm not sure if that was the quake's doing or a couple of lowbrow vandals. Either way, they've now been moved. Now, of course, Farmers, the Astron Centre, Reading, they're not the only buildings affected in Wellington. There are a handful more that have been cordoned off. Of course, 61 Molesworth Street, that's being demolished as we speak. The government will extend its support for Kaikoura businesses to the capital. It will cover up to 8 weeks and help employees pay wages. But for many people out of work, they need these kind of buildings to start opening as soon as possible.
Max Toll on his phone. Go Max. The tourism tremors from the Kaikoura earthquakes are hitting Picton hard. We've just crossed the strait. Moteliers say international tourists are still cancelling bookings because they think the town has been affected by the recent earthquake. The region's tourism organisation, Destination Marlborough, says it's taking action to reassure overseas travellers that it's business as usual as it heads into what should be its busiest and also most profitable time of the year. Anusha Bradley reports.
The manager of the Picton Accommodation Gateway Motel, Kent Stevenson, says he's been getting up to 4 cancellations a day since the earthquake struck more than 2 weeks ago.
Lots of people out there are nervous about visiting the top of the south, which is perhaps a little bit concerning for us. We've been receiving quite a few phone calls and emails and whatnot from all over the world, really, of guests who are just really worried or wondering about the situation here in Picton, and we've been reassuring them that there's nothing wrong, everything's very normal here.
It's a similar story a few hundred metres down the road at the Broadway Motel. Its manager, Melanie Kirsten, says up until a few days ago, she had been getting between 10 and 18 cancellations a day, mostly from international tourists.
We're hoping the word has got out that we're all okay. A lot of us are helping each other out in the fact that if one motel is fully booked, we're passing on the business to other people that do have accommodation.
The accommodation manager for Hospitality New Zealand, Rachel Shadbolt, says tourists may have been spooked by international media reports that suggested much of the country had been affected by the quakes. She says while there have been cancellations, business is picking up again for some.
They are reporting that their bookings seem to be shifting from a one-night stay to a two-night stay, which is quite an interesting scenario there, I guess, while people work out how best they travel.
The General Manager of Destination Marlborough, Tracy Johnston, says most of the cancellations appear to be coming from tourists who booked online.
Is around those that are using third-party booking engines like Expedia and Booking.com, because there's no ability there for the operator or the travel agent to be able to reassure people that there is no consequence of the earthquake here in Marlborough, or certainly more broadly in New Zealand.
Destination Marlborough says it's working with Tourism New Zealand to spread the word that Marlborough, and indeed most of New Zealand, is really open for business. That's music to Kent Stevenson's ears at Picton's Gateway Motel.
A lot of these tourists that are coming just probably want some reassurance or that the place is functioning well, and there's really no issue here. You know, we're just full steam ahead, ready for a good summer.
The first convoy of civilian vehicles travelled the quake-damaged inland route to Kaikoura today, while the contracting company working to clear State Highway 1 between Kaikoura and Cheviot says the road could be cleared for essential traffic within a fortnight. For Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
Taranaki, iwi and hapu members have been in Parliament to see 3 settlement bills for their area passed into law, in what for many was an emotionally charged conclusion to a long battle for justice. The reading of the bills was held up 2 months ago by New Zealand First, who at the last moment pulled their support. However, there were no hold-ups today as Taranaki tribal members filled the public gallery of Parliament. Te Manu Kōrehi reporter Shannon Aunui-Thompson has more.
A waiata by representatives of Ngā Ruahine, Te Atiawa and Taranaki Tūturu as the bills were passed to finally address the historical injustices inflicted on their people. MPs stood in the House and gave emotional accounts of the killings and land losses all 3 iwi suffered. The Treaty Minister, Chris Finlayson, said the bills are one way to acknowledge the history of Taranaki and place it in the permanent record of Parliament so that all New Zealanders know what happened.
In those conflicts, the Crown used warships to shell Taranaki iwi coastal settlements, employed scorched earth tactics that destroyed settlements and cultivations, desecrated sacred sites by building military redoubts on them, and caused Taranaki iwi to suffer severe hardship. And then, to top it off, the Crown punished the iwi of Taranaki for their resistance by confiscating 1.2 million acres of land, including every acre of the Taranaki iwi rohe not already purchased.
All 3 settlements include financial redress and a Crown apology for its actions in the 3 decades that followed the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi in 1840. The Crown apologised for its role in the outbreak of war in Taranaki and specifically for its use of scorched earth tactics that it says devastated cultivations, livestock and food stores. A New Zealand First MP, Pita Paraone, spoke about his party's concerns that the 3 bills make iwi appointments to the Regional Council compulsory.
Like the previous bill, New Zealand First still has that concern, where it imposes on the council that it must make those appointments. And yet, under the local government bill, The word that is used is may.
Many iwi members in the public gallery cried during proceedings today. With high hopes, settlements will be the start of a new beginning for all Taranaki iwi and Hapū. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Shannon Haunui-Thompson, ahau.
Kia ora, Shannon. We're going to end tonight with a musical note of sorts. Police on Prince Edward Island in Canada have come up with a novel way of discouraging drink drivers. When the Mounties finally get their man or woman in court, as well as the usual penalties, they confront them with a requirement to listen to Nickelback for a long time. Now, we don't know if it amounts to a cruel or unusual punishment. We're going to leave you tonight with the opportunity to judge for yourself. Good night, everyone.
First on the bad list, and you're last on mine. Looking for a scapegoat, long past due. Walking down the aisle, still straight at you. Still hear you screaming, where do I hide? And all he asks, are silvering inside.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The first private convoy of vehicles has just got through to Kaikoura, but the return journey was cancelled, with the risks of rockfalls increasing with poor weather. The Greens have added their voice to calls for an independent inquiry into the abuse of children in state care and a formal apology to all of victims. A Pike River mine father says protesters will return to the entrance tomorrow to continue fighting the sealing of the mine. Tens of thousands of people in the Brazilian town of Chapecó have been paying homage to the victims of the plane crash in Colombia, in which most of the town's football team were killed. And New Zealand, Egypt and Spain have tabled a joint resolution on the Syrian crisis with the UN Security Council, demanding a ceasefire for the besieged city of Aleppo. Our next news and weather is at 7.